The early morning mist still clung to the rolling hills of the vineyard in Tuscany, but Eleanor was already awake, standing on her terracotta balcony with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. At 62, Eleanor had spent the last 30 years building this estate alongside her late husband, Arthur. It was their paradise, their legacy, and since his passing 4 years ago, it had been her sanctuary. However, today, the serene silence of the countryside felt heavy with the premonition of conflict. Eleanor turned back into her bedroom, her eyes scanning the small, almost invisible lens hidden within the ornate frame of a painting near the door. She checked her phone. The feed was live and recording. She didn't want to believe that she needed surveillance in her own home, especially for a visit from her own flesh and blood. But the notifications from her bank 2 weeks ago regarding unauthorized access attempts had shattered her trust. She knew who had tried to access her accounts. Today she would find out why. A few hours later, a rental car crunched up the graveled driveway. Eleanor smoothed down her linen dress and took a deep breath, composing her features into a mask of welcoming warmth. Her daughter, Isabella, stepped out of the car first. Isabella was beautiful, with the same dark hair as her mother, but her face was pinched with a tension that makeup couldn't hide. Behind her trailed Liam, Isabella's husband, a man who had always smiled too much and worked too little. They didn't bring the grandchildren this time. They had said it was an adults-only trip to reconnect. Eleanor knew better. The absence of the children meant this was a business meeting disguised as a family reunion. Lunch was set in the garden, under the shade of an ancient olive tree. Eleanor had prepared all of Isabella's favorites: roasted lamb, fresh caprese salad, and a bottle of the estate's best vintage red wine. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation was painfully superficial. They talked about the weather in London, Liam's struggling tech startup, and the cost of living. Eleanor watched them closely. She saw the glances they exchanged, the silent signals of two people rehearsing a script. She waited, sipping her water, letting them navigate their own trap. Finally, as the plates were cleared, Liam cleared his throat, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. He started by complimenting the house, the land, and how much space Eleanor had all to herself. He mentioned how lonely she must be, a widow managing such a large property. Eleanor smiled politely, correcting him gently that she was quite busy with the harvest and her local charity work, but Liam pressed on. He began to talk about his parents, who lived in a cramped apartment in Manchester. He spoke of their failing health and their financial struggles, painting a tragic picture. Then came the pitch. Isabella took over, her voice taking on a wheedling, desperate tone. She proposed that Liam's parents move into the guest villa on Eleanor's estate. They argued it made perfect sense. The villa was empty. Liam's parents could help manage the grounds, and Eleanor would have company. Eleanor listened in silence until they finished. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw not concern but calculation. She set her glass down softly. She told them clearly and calmly that while she sympathized with Liam's parents, the answer was no. She explained that the estate was her business and her home, not a commune, and she valued her privacy above all else. She suggested they help Liam's parents find a more affordable place in the UK, perhaps by cutting back on their own lavish lifestyle. The air at the table shifted instantly. The veneer of politeness cracked. Isabella's face flushed red. She accused her mother of being selfish, of hoarding wealth while family suffered. She threw Arthur's name into the fight, claiming her father would never have turned family away. Eleanor remained steel, reminding Isabella that Arthur had worked himself to the bone to build this, not to support able-bodied adults who refused to live within their means. That was when the conversation took a darker turn. Liam, losing his composure, muttered about how the estate was too much for an old woman to handle and that perhaps she wasn't thinking clearly. Isabella seized on this, suggesting that maybe Eleanor was becoming senile, that she needed a guardian to manage her assets properly. Eleanor let out a dry, humorless laugh. She revealed that she knew about the attempted transfers from her investment account. She saw the color drain from Liam's face. She told them she knew they were drowning in debt because of Liam's gambling and Isabella's spending, and that this plan wasn't about helping Liam's parents. It was about getting a foothold in the estate to seize control. Exposed and humiliated, Isabella snapped. She stood up screaming that the money was rightfully hers, her inheritance, and she shouldn't have to wait for her mother to die to enjoy it. In a fit of blind rage, Isabella grabbed the heavy wine bottle from the center of the table. It happened in a blur. Isabella swung the bottle. It didn't hit Eleanor directly in the head, but the heavy glass base struck her shoulder and the side of her neck with sickening force. The bottle shattered, spraying wine and glass shards everywhere. Eleanor gasped, falling back into her chair, clutching her neck. A sharp pain radiated down her arm, and she felt the warm, sticky flow of blood. Whether from the glass or the impact, she couldn't tell in the shock of the moment. Silence descended on the garden, broken only by the chirping of cicadas. Isabella stood frozen, the neck of the broken bottle still in her hand, staring at her mother in horror. Liam looked like he was about to be sick. Eleanor didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply pressed a linen napkin to her neck, her eyes cold and hard as diamonds. She stood up, shaky but upright. She told them to leave. Immediately. Isabella tried to stammer an apology, claiming it was an accident, that she slipped, but Eleanor raised a hand to stop her. She pointed to the security camera mounted on the pergola beam above them, its red light blinking steadily. She told them every word, every threat, and the assault had been recorded. Panic took over. Liam grabbed Isabella and they fled toward their car, tires spinning in the gravel as they sped away, leaving Eleanor bleeding in her garden. Eleanor didn't call them back. She called the police, and then she called her lawyer. The next few hours were a procedural whirlwind. The police arrived, took her statement, and collected the video footage. an ambulance crew treated her injuries. She had severe bruising and a deep laceration that required stitches, but no major arteries were hit. She was lucky physically, but emotionally. The mother she had been died that afternoon. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor displayed a ruthlessness that shocked everyone who knew her. She didn't drop the charges. Isabella was arrested at the airport attempting to fly back to London. The video footage was damning evidence of assault with a weapon. Eleanor filed for a permanent restraining order against both her daughter and son-in-law, but the final blow was financial. Eleanor worked with her legal team to completely restructure her estate. She created a living trust that explicitly disinherited Isabella. Instead, the vast majority of her assets were allocated to a foundation for young female entrepreneurs and a scholarship fund. She set up a small, strictly controlled educational trust for her grandchildren, which they could only access after turning 25, ensuring Isabella and Liam could never touch a cent of it. 6 months later, the legal battles were over. Isabella had pleaded guilty to a lesser charge to avoid a long prison sentence, but was on probation and had a criminal record. The scandal had cost Liam his investors. They were ruined. Eleanor, however, was sitting on the deck of a cruise ship navigating the fjords of Norway. The cool, crisp air felt cleansing. She held a glass of champagne, watching the glaciers pass by. She was alone, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel lonely. She felt a profound sense of liberation. She had cut out the rot from her life, painful as it was, and saved herself. She took a sip of the champagne, toasted the horizon, and smiled. Her life was finally, truly her own.